it is my pleasure to introduce our lecturer today, Benito Navarrete Prieto. He is a full professor of history of art at the Department of History and Philosophy at the Universidad Alcalá. Previously, he was the director of cultural infrastructure and heritage for the Seville City Council and was a lecturer at the universities of Valencia, Oviedo, and Valladolid. He earned his PhD in 1998 with a thesis that focused on 17th century Andalusian painting and its engraved sources. And since then, his work has focused on the study of paintings by artists from Andalusia and Madrid, as well as Spanish drawing in general. He's published articles in journals such as Gazette de Beaux-Arts, Master Drawings, and Print Quarterly, and he's curated a number of exhibitions, including Zurbaran in his workshop, Painting for the New World, The Role of Drawing in Spain, and Saints of Zurbaran, Devotion and Persuasion. He's the author of a recent book titled Murillo, Persuasion and Aura, and we at the Meadows Museum are so pleased to have him join us in Dallas, all the way from Spain, to deliver our lecture today on Alonso Cano.
Thank you very much, and you are very, very kind. Thank you for your assistance. I am very grateful to Mr. Marc Roland for his cordial invitation for this conference, and I congratulate him for all his efforts to position the Dallas Museum as a reference in the study of Spanish art in the United States. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone in Europe. Alonso Cano is without doubt one of our most versatile artists, and his resourcefulness meant that he was able to work in a wide range of fields, including painting, sculpture, architecture, drawing, and even etching. There is no other Spanish artist who has demonstrated similar capabilities in such a range of artistic genres, and whose work is so balanced and rational, convinced as he was on the one hand that what he was undertaking was an intellectual activity, whilst on the other displaying a tendency towards classicism in a constant search for harmony, composition, equilibrium, perfection, and above all, as Javier Portus pointed out, a narrative sense in which the fundamental aspect was the history. It is precisely this capacity to describe these narratives and make his composition credible and familiar, which is one of Cano's greatest skills, and this can be explained perfectly by understanding his thinking and the way in which he understood the process of creation and the search for beauty as an entirely intellectual activity. I think that's the PowerPoint notice.
Yeah, I think we're not seeing the PowerPoint, so you may need to reshare your screen. We can definitely take a moment.
Now it's okay.
There we go. Yes.
Now it's okay. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. It is precisely this capacity to describe these narratives and make his composition credible and familiar. Contemporary sources from the time seem to be quite clear about this, and Palomino, who wrote of those he knew, told us of an anecdote which clearly indicates Cano's approach to the artist's process. Sometimes old Cano, tired of painting, asked his apprentice, who was helping him, for a chisel, a mallet, and other tools to work on a sculpture, because he wished to rest for a while. The young lad would laugh and say, "Sir, leaving a brush and taking up a mallet is hardly the best way to rest," to which the master would reply, "Do you take me for a fool? Do you not realize that it is more difficult to give form and body where there is none than give shape to something which already has some?" In this method of generating from where there was previously none, in other words, the process of creation itself, the search for inspiration was made much simpler for our artists by the library he developed and the rank of sources in the form of sketch and models, which we know for certain that he lived in the inn at the Cartuja de Portacelli in Valencia between 1644 and 1645, after having abandoned Madrid following allegation that he had assassinated to his second wife. In the description that the artist himself included in his will, he mentions that in the Cartuja in Valencia, he left architectural books, sketch, and model inside Sam's chest. As we discussed in 1996, these belongings were precisely those which were purchased by the Valencian painter Vicente Salvador Gómez on the 3rd of March, 1673. In the purchase document, there are further details, and it states that he paid the head prior of the convent and monastery of the Virgin Mary in Portacelli the sum of 15 pounds, the understanding amount from a total of 16, which was the price of all the models, papers, prints, drawings, and different people and signed boxes and sheets belonging to Don Alonso Cano, court painter to His Majesty King Philip IV, all of which Don Alonso Cano sent from the city of Granada to the Casa Hospicio de la Cartuja, which is situated in the city of Valencia. Palomino also mentioned models and other pieces of art which Cano left in Valencia in the name of another painter from the city, Gaspar de la Huerta, who had no option but to acquire them in an auction held by Vicente Salvador Gómez. To gain more clues about the content of the chest and the art books belonging to the Granadan artist, which Vicente Salvador bought in 1673, only a year later, and almost certainly not by coincidence, Gómez published his Cartilla y Fundamentales Reglas de Pintura. In it, he names the artists he consulted, and in the introduction, he discussed some of the great painters who had written about the art form, including Giorgio Vasari, Aretino, Paulo Lomazzo, Juan Bautista Armenini, Vicencio Carduccio, and amongst Spanish artists Pacheco de Sevilla and the silversmith Juan de Arfe y Villafañe. He also names other artists such as the German Albert Dürer and Leonardo da Vinci, and states that he has studied the majority of these works, as well as others which are described at the end of the Cartilla, and that he was the owner of all this material. This was confirmed by María José López Azorín, who discovered an inventory in the Valencian archives, which was carried on following the death of Salvador Gómez and dated in 1678, in which several of the work appear. We will rather not enter into the argument as to which of the books belonged to Alonso Cano and which were acquired by Vicente Salvador Gómez, as we have discussed this in a previous article in which we put forward an hypothesis concerning the content of Cano's library. Instead, we would prefer to concentrate on the art and architectural books published before 1645, with the central aim of demonstrating how the books he owned had a direct effect on his art. This is the purpose of this paper. The books of architecture include Práctica de la Perspectiva by Vignola, Architettura by Vitrovio in Italian, Architettura by Sebastiano Serlio, Architettura by Pietro Cataneo, Architettura by Vignola, Architettura by Vignola in Italian, Architettura by Juan Antonio Rusconi, Regule Generale de Architettura, Palladio de Arquitectura, a work by Antonio Lavaco on architecture, Los 10 libros de arquitectura by Alberti in Italian, Perspectiva Práctica by Pietro Accolti, Práctica de la Perspectiva by Lorenzo Sirigatti, Práctica de la Perspectiva by Daniele Barbaro, de Arquitectura y Escultura by Juan de Arfe, Arte y Uso de la Arquitectura by Padre Fray Lorenzo de San Nicolás, Medidas del Romano by Sagredo, and Nouvelles Inventions pour Ben Bastir by Philibert Delorme. all of these different works, I am particularly interested in this cover of the book, De la Regole delle Cinque Ordini d'Architettura by Giacomo Barocchio da Vignola, because precisely in the library of the Colegio Territorial de Arquitectos de Valencia, there is a first edition from 1562. It is the volume. For some years, I have firmly believed that this belonged to Alonso Cano himself and was carried by Vicente Salvador Gomez. The book contains a series of traces of architectural drawing of altarpiece, some of which it is belonging in the Vignola of Valencia. Identified myself and discussed it together with Alfonso Pérez Sánchez in 1996 in an article in Archivo Español de Arte entitled Sobre Francisco Herrera el Viejo. Among all of these drawings, which were centrally carried out in Seville, there are preparatory sketches like this for the plaster work of the Colegio de San Buenaventura de Sevilla, with outline the raised section and the arcades and frames where Francisco de Zurbarán and Francisco de Herrera, the elder, will create the series dedicated to the life of San Buenaventura. Stuck to one of the pages of the book is a preparatory drawing of the plaster work for the dome of the church, work which were carried out between 1626 and 1627 by Juan Bernardo de Velasco and Juan de Segarra, using design by Herrera, and there is also another preparatory sketch for the decoration for the choir. The next contribution which we made to the identification of the drawing in the Vignola, preserved in the Vignola by Cano in Valencia, was in 2005, when two traces of altarpiece by Juan Martínez Montañés for his early Retablo de la Inmaculada for the parish church of El Pedroso, Seville, were found in the Vignola book, as well as significant design for the lost main altarpiece from the monastery of Santo Domingo de Portacelli in Seville, which Martínez Montañés carried out between 1605 and 1609, thereby establishing the typical form for proto-Baroque altarpiece in the city. The engraving of the Vignola cover also provides the prototypes for the pendiment finals with the cherubs holding the shield, as we can see, for example, in some of the finals of the altarpiece by Martínez Montañés. The influence of the architectural orders proposed by Vignola can also be seen in Juan Sánchez Cotán, trompe-l'oeil of the altarpiece of the Cartuja de Granada. On the other hand, amongst the prints which appeared to be inserted in the treatise and confirmed that it was effectively being compiled by an artist and a working tool, and therefore something which is instrumental in the creative activity of sculptors, architects, and painters. There is a collection of prints by Bredemant de Bries, featuring architectural backgrounds and fountains for his books entitled Artis Perspectivae Plurium Generum, as well as other prints of tabernacles and funerary tumuli and drawings of Roman and Florentine buildings by Michelangelo. There are also prints by Francisco de Herrera the Elder, such as the cover of the commentary in Summa Theologicae Santo Tomae from 1623, the rare engraving of Patronato de la Orden Trinitaria from 1627, on which the only known example is in the Biblioteca Nacional de España, and our artist proof of the cover of the book entitled Novus Index Librorum Prohibitorum by Cardinal Antonio Zapata, which was printed in Seville by Francisco de Lira in 1632, and based on a drawing by Juan de Herrera and an etching by Alardo de Opoma. I am particularly interested in the artist's proof of this print because if we compare it with the final result, we can observe that it is clearly carried out, carried out before the title of the work was placed in its designated space. We can now add a new element which corroborates, in my opinion, that this example, the book by Vignola, which is preserved in Valencia, is almost certainly the one which belonged to Alonso Cano, and which he used as an aid to the creative process, basing the fundamental aspect of his art on the classical tradition. This becomes clear when we compare this print with this cover, this cover of the book entitled Vida y Martirio, Traslación y Milagros de San Eufrasio, Obispo y Patrón de Andújar, by Antonio Terrones y Robles, and published in Granada in 1657. Research carried out by Zaira Belith has identified two preparatory drawings for the work. One is in the Prado Museum that was studied by José Manuel Matilla in his exhibition and shows sketches of the figures of the saints Potenciana and Euphrasius on the pedestals, as well as fine trace of an angel and some words surrounding a coat of arms, while the other is in the Courtauld Gallery in London. And it is more complete, which suggests that it is the final sketch for the print. In it, Zaira Belith discovered some small engraving marks on the figure of Potenciana, and the overall side is similar to that of the action plate, which could well mean that it is the preparatory work for the printer himself. Comparing the final etching and above all the position of the sign, it is the proof of Antonio Zapata, the first in the Vignola in Valencia, is the proof, the first type without the title of the book, and the second is the book with the title, the final printed. Comparing the final etching and about all the position of the sign Potenciana and Euphrasius, it's made by Alonso Cano, as well as the broken architectural cornice, which finishes off both the drawing and the etching. We can observe that there is a complete parallel with the cover of the book by Zapata, or with the Vignola book in Valencia, concerning the artist's proof, demonstrating therefore that the style of the etching had a direct impact on Cano. Furthermore, at least one of the drawing of altarpiece, which is to be found in the Valencia Vignola, can certainly be related to Cano, as we indicate in 2007 and was corroborated by Zaira Belith. We refer to a Aug main altarpiece with coats of arms of shoot Carmelites, in which we can clearly see the characteristic leather sandals correctly modeled in the style of Alonso Cano, as well as a tabernacle and the typical garlanded scrolls. We know that Cano worked in Seville for the Church of San Alberto in the College of the Shoot Carmelites, and it is quite possible that this was a preparatory drawing for the primitive main altarpiece of the church. What is evident is that the way that the altarpiece is neatly and cleanly drawn clearly follows the classicist premise which Vignola proposed in his treatise, and as such is almost certainly the result of having studied the proportion and symmetry, as well as the illustrated example included in the Italian work. But this tendency to capture the classical ideal which Cano was to display through his work is not only based on the laws of perspective and symmetry found in the treatise, but is also due to an aesthetic adherence to the cult of beauty. There is probably no other artist like Cano when it comes to the freedom with which he depicted nudes in terms of both their design and composition. In this respect, another element that I consider key in his models related with some of the sculptures by Jerónimo Hernández, an artist whose work is present in the Valencian Vignola, also included some traces of an altarpiece by Jerónimo Hernández. The relation becomes even clearer if we compare the recent increase documented his in the show in 1582, today in the confraternity of the Quinta Angustia, and the figure of the Christ in Cano's painting of the Vision of Santa Teresa, now in the Museo del Prado, but painting for one of the altarpiece in the church of San Alberto in Seville. The comparison is sufficient to reveal how much both artists owe to the classical canon of Lysippus, and thus the preference for elegance and classicism that will be decisive in understanding late Renaissance sculpture. Undoubtedly, the cohabitation between Velázquez and Cano in Francisco Pacheco workshop must have produced a profitable apprentissage for both artists in 1616. It is precisely between 1616 and 1620 that I place the Immaculate Conception by the young Velázquez, now fortunately recovered for Seville by the Focus Foundation. I think it is only fair to acknowledge here that it was Jonathan Brown who first saw Velázquez's hand in this Immaculate Conception, which I was later able to determine probably came from the collection of the Deán López Cepero in Seville in 19th century. This work must be seen in close relation and probably made in clear challenger learning with this new Immaculate Conception, which now I present for all of the audience in exclusive in this paper. I am absolutely convinced on the quality of this Alonso Cano, young Alonso Cano picture. It's preserved in a collection in French that I have studied the past years, pre-COVID time, belonging to a family that has more Spanish works and probably the product of Napoleonic plundering. If we compare the two pictures at the same, exactly the same size, the same dimension, exactly. It is the reason that I say, I am convinced that it is a challenging, encouragement, desafío, like a topos, no? If we compare the two works, we can see how Velázquez prefers a fusiform canon, which Cano would like to exploit, noticing in the new work the two angels that appear in the lower part, one carrying the lilies, another a bouquet of roses. In a clear allusion to the mystical rose and to Mary's purity, I am also interested in the subbeams that are projected on the crown and emanate from the head in both works, while in Cano's work, the entire nebula surrounding the Immaculate Conception is flooded with cherub's head. Velázquez is all clean lines, the images imposing itself on its own. The sculptural surrounding that we can see in the face of the Velázquez, which looks at us from the front, in contrast to Cano, which looks to the sides with his head humiliated, but his head is already marking the ovoid type that will be characteristics of his Immaculate Conception. Another important element is the way in which the paste is wrapped. It is a very, very important comparison. You can see in the right the Velázquez brushes grouped, and Alonso Cano is absolutely painted in Pacheco workshop. In the two artists are absolutely in competition. It's very, very interesting to can see, and the white of the varnish and the fresh flow, no, in the picture. We can compare this rubbed to show the difference in the impasto and brushstroke. I show you the detail of the head of Cano's St. John in Patmos from the Wallace collection, which formed part of the altarpiece in the church of Santa Paula between 1635 and 1637, many years after this Immaculate Conception, which I consider to be from around 1620. And as Haifa said, painted in competition with Velázquez, we can see in the details of the angel faith that his faith becomes soft and modeling, always tendency to our ideal beauty. You can see here in the St. John in Patmos from the Wallace. Another element to be considered in his apprenticeship is what Cano owes to Juan Martínez Montañés. I think it is sufficiently important to have shown that this copy of the Valencian Vignola was owned by Cano, and that Montañés' drawings of altarpiece were found among the leaves of the treatise engravings. We also have testimonies of contrast in which Cano is expressly requested in 1633 to copy images by Montañés for reason of taste, as in the commission from the sculptor Martín de Andújar for a sculpture of San Antonio of Padua in Cypress wood, with the child seated on a book, specifying that it should be as good as one that Juan Martínez Montañés is finishing, which they say is for the Queen or Lady. It is very likely that this commission is related to their desire to trade with America, violating the copyright of the sculptor for reason of taste and making Martín de Andújar pass the sculpture off as his own for the American market. The contract even contemplates the possibility of moving Cano's St. Anthony to the site of Montañés' sculpture in order to make it easier for the expert who were to appraise the sculpture to compare the two sculptures. This justifies the fact that he must have admired him and learned from him. Although I certainly agree that, as Manuel García Luque has pointed out, Cano from a young age had his own language, which distanced him from Montañés. However, right here in the Dallas Museum, there is a sculpture by Montañés on the Saint John the Baptist in the right, which must be related to the sculpture of the same subject in the National Sculpture Museum in Valladolid, and which must have come from the original altarpiece of San Juan de la Palma, painted in 1635. As García Luque pointed out, the explanation lies in the fact that Cano followed Montañés' model, which is now in the convent of Santa Ana in Seville, here in show, represents St. John the Baptist according to the vision of Mother Luisa de Guzman, prioress of the convent of Belém, who commissioned in 1605 the same sculpture to Montañés, and who claimed to have seen the precursor, about 20 years old, dressed in skins, with his head inside and seated on a rock, with a lamp resting in his head on his left knee, which the saint was holding in his hand on the same side. However, it is in the visualization of the nude and the modeling on his features, softening those of Montañez, that we see the difference in conception between the two sculptures. In the artist's painting of the years too, we began to notice this tendency towards classicism as well as toward softness of form and nudity, as is evident in the St. John the Baptist in the Ringling Museum in Sarasota, whose nudity and pose must possibly be seen in relation to Simone Cantarini's print of St. John in the desert. Cano's use of Cantarini print was important and is also a key element in understanding his predilection for such characteristic form, as can be seen in the comparison of the print of the Virgin and Child by the engraver from Pesaro and the drawing of the same subject in the Louvre, which was also the origin of an iconography that will reach its peak in his Virgin of the Rosary in Malaga Cathedral. The truth is that Cano sublimated this process of searching for a stereotype with the sculpture of the Immaculate Conception, which was originally intended for the lectern of the cathedral, but was finally placed in the sacristy because of the beauty of the work and where he used the fusiform type of the well-known print by Raffaello Schiaminosi as the starting point, completely transforming it. He did the same in his sculpture of the Virgin and Child, which he made to replace the lectern and where the fold in the lower part are directly related to the Zucker's broken forms, which he studied through the print by Cornelis Scott of the prophets who foretold the coming of the Messiah, specifically in the fold that cover the knees of the figure of David. Even work based on other artists' model display a special sensitivity in the respect, and despite the fact that what he found in print must have been a point of reference. It is certainly true that his piece would not have been possible without a profound knowledge of classical sculpture. This can be seen in his drawing of a nude woman, which the Prado Museum acquired some years ago, in which he juxtaposes almost as if it were a declaration of intent, the nude and the rules of proportion and symmetry in an architectural outline of an arch, which is depicted using a compass and also inspired by one of the illustrations featured in his Vignola. It was precisely Delphine Rodriguez who correctly recognizes the similarities between the abandoned appearance of the naked woman and the mannerist sculpture of the Ninfa Dormida, which belonged to Fernando Enrique de Rivera, the Duke of Alcalá. It is described as a Venus sleeping on a bed on a white marble. In the inventories of 1751, mentioned by Vicente Lleó and identified as Venus or Susana, featured in a fountain in the style of a Renaissance grotto, which was created for the Duke's civilian palace known as the Casa de Pilatos. In this way, the statue of Venus or the nymph respond to the fashion for imitation with pieces that were almost pastiche or copies of antiquities, so that they will appear Roman, emulating the pseudo-Cleopatra in the Belvedere patio of the Vatican. It is highly probably that the drawing in the Prado could be related to a preparatory design for a fountain, with the architectural element of the arch being inserted first and the figure of the nymph reclining over a rug surface being added later. She is positioned on a pile of stones, apparently in a state of sensual abandon. The way she is depicted has been compared by Thaira Bellit to a print of a naked woman here in the show, in the Tekenboag, on the subject of composition by Abraham Broemeyer. This print of this fountain could also explain the drawing in the Uffizi of Venus with a Satyr and Cupids, which, in our opinion, has not been created by using real models, but rather by using classical sculpture or the prints suggested by Bellit, since in the 17th century it was not permitted to use real models to create female nudes. Another aspect of interest, and not a minor one, concerns the technical aspect. Inspiration from engraving also provided Cano with the possibility of practicing with the pen scratching or featuring that in some way imitated the reticulation of the butyrin of the copper and its imprint on the paper. It is precisely in this facet where we can see his input in this drawing, such as Venus Cupid and a satyr here in the show, or in the recently drawing acquired by Dallas Museum here in the show, Transit of the Madeleine, that I have published in Archivo Español de Arte, where the line becomes even thicker, which also bears witness to his creative freedom. It is precisely in the same register that we can see the impressive drawing of the horseman and the seated young man, both in the Uffizi and directly related in their technique to the Midas drawing. But above all, Cano must have used sculpture as a source of inspiration for his unique way of understanding aesthetic principles, much in the same way as his contemporary and friend Diego Velázquez. This is something which was highlighted by the scholar Jean Bermúdez in his biography, the simplicity of the demeanors, the grandness of the forms, the realism and the tasteful depiction of fall, of clothes, which he applied to his sculpture, suggests that his true source of knowledge could have come from the Greek statues and busts which were to be found in Seville at the time in the Duke of Alcalà's residence, the Casa de Pilatos. Neither could Montañés have thought him such perfect masking, nor could he have simply invented forms which were so close to those of antiquity. This classical ideal, which Van refers to in some of the sculpture, is undoubtedly present in the bust he made of Adam and Eve, which were commissioned by the Cathedral Chapter's house in 1666-1667, towards the end of his life, and were placed in the circular niches of the size of the triumphal arch of the Greek chapel in the Cathedral of Granada. The two busts have been conceived as almost classical work, with the distinctive angle of the head, which is very reminiscent of Roman sculpture. This posture, and above all the sense of melancholy of the face of Adam, bears a distinct similarity to the first century of the Roman after death, Roman sculpture of Ganymedes in the Alhambra, which Cano must have studied here in the show during his latter years, since during the first quarter of the 17th century, the sculpture was situated in the Adarbes garden at the foot of the Alcazaba placed on a pillar. José Beltrán Fortes has associated this bust with one which is mentioned by Francisco Bermúdez de Pedraza in 1638 in the Royal Hall of Castile. It is not unlikely that Cano was inspired by the sculpture, since the shape of the edge shocks, as well as the eyebrows and the mouth, bear a close resemblance to his depiction of Adam. These same classical characteristics are also evident in the bust of Eve, which is undoubtedly related to that of Juno, which Alfonso Pérez Sánchez brought to public attention and which is conserved today in a private collection in Madrid. It is a perfect example of the mythological themes featured in Cano's paintings, and there is an evident sensuality in the treatment of the figure, especially in the way her breast is left uncovered, which is also reminiscent of Nordic etching. Now I would like to present the preparatory drawing for this work, where he clearly used Jacob beings engraving on a composition by Caraglio. The latter is decisive for detecting how the sketch that belonged to Matthias Polakovich's collection, and where we even note that the peacock accompanying Juno comes from same print, as well as the profile of her head and above all the uncovered breast in the definitive painting. This new work of Juno, drawn with a quill using brown ink, is an example of a vibrant sketch in which, with bold, rapid strokes, the artist from Granada has drawn in the first idea of such a suggestive painting, and here barely hinted at. Although there are very few examples of work representing secular or mythological themes, it is certain that Cano did carry out such commissions, as is evidenced by the 1665 testimony and inventory by Margarita Cajes, daughter of the artist Eugenio, which mentions a canvas with a painting of the fable of Icarus, another of the fable of Venus and Cupid, which can be related to the drawing in the Uffizi, and two other canvases, one of which represents Pallas and the other Apollo. The classical component and the sensuality, which are clearly evident in his mythological works, are also presented in his relation painting, some of which were originally conceived as secular themes, and where the artist in narrative styles emerged naturally. This is evident in Chris' descent into limbo, the show, which is now housed in Los Angeles County Museum, and in which the figures of Eve, Christ, and the child Abel are all depicted with great mastery. This sensuality and effortlessness with which he painted Eve is related in equal part to version of Venus by Titian and Velázquez, and is described by Juan Antonio Gallanuño as the most fleshy and affectionate of bodies, the sweetest and most pleasurable, the most harmonious, and clothed in its nakedness in all the history of Spanish art, say Gallanuño. When it comes to the depiction of Eve, nor should we ignore the engraving by Jacob Bing, based on a composition by Caraglio, showing Juno from behind. What is clearly evident is that this work, despite having been inspired in terms of its composition by a print by Giulio Bonazzoni, as Wethe correctly pointing out. I would never have been painted in this manner had Cano not had access to the royal collection, and especially the Poesias by Titian. This was highlighted by Portus, who observed that there is an important narrative element and a complete mastery of the figures, anatomy, proportion, and expression. This determination to avoid the established codes and embrace a specific type of beauty led him to approach religious painting as if they were secular themes. This explains his position in the history of painting, and particularly his role as an artist who understands the classical style and its significance as something which is inherent in the art form. This is the engraving by Caraglio that was a very, very good seen by Wethe to see the difference. The same could be said about the portrait of Bacchus, which is housed in the Royal Academy of Fine Art of San Fernando. Despite Itziar Arana's reservation, it has recently been attributed to the Granadan painter, and we are centrally in agreement that there is no problem in confirming Alonso Cano as the author. In this work, it is evident that Cano once again feels comfortable using the habitual codes of classical methodology, and as on the other occasion, he seems to reference another work, Sileno Ebrio by José de Rivera, a print on which was published in 1628, based on the 1626 original, which is in the Museum of Capodimonte. Nevertheless, whilst in the composition by Rivera, the figure of Bacchus is washing how the satyr fills his cap, in the painting, which is now located in the Royal Academy of Fine Art and comes from the Godoy collection, the Bacchus figure is already weakened by his evident innervation, and his head falls toward the satyrs, which are the one side, whilst the goblet is isolated at the center of the composition as a clear protagonist. Therefore, whereas in the Rivera the essential themes is focused on how Bacchus' cap is vilified, in the Cano interpretation his naked body is more fully covered with the red cloak, which hides his privacy, and the central protagonist is the wine itself. The attribution of this Bacchus to Cano can now also be supported by the drawing in the Biblioteca Nacional de España, preserved among the Italians, which is a sketch for the head of this painting that should also be related to the royal collection. The drawing also has an identical inscription. It is very important for show now. You see in the screen that are exactly the same mark on his upper part to that of the Juno, so that the two, as it is the Juno mark and the Bacco mark, so that the two works are in some way related. Cano was well versed in mythology, and in his library where there were a number of books which contained information about this subject. It is for this reason that there are two editions of Metamorphosis by Ovid, one of which contains prints, and another volume entitled Imágenes de los Dioses de los Antiguos, which might be related to the work by Carlos Cartari, published in Venice in 1556, as well as Filosofía Secreta by Pérez de Moya, which was published in Madrid in 1584. There were also books on the subject of emblems, allegorical illustration, such as Emblemas Morales by Covarrubias, those by Alfiato, the Empresas by Fabrizio Ruccelli and Capaccio, and above all works on anatomy such as Historia de la Composición del Cuerpo Humano by Juan Valverde de Amusco, which is colloquially known as Valverde's Anatomía. Cano is undoubtedly a complete artist who differs significantly from his contemporaries. Although it has been the focus of several studies, his work requires further analysis or even a complete reprisal, since his artistic significance has not been fully appreciated, and it has been impossible to properly separate his distinctive roles as a painter, sculptor, and architect, nor it's possible to understand the different aspects of his artistic life without having a profound knowledge of the books and other material which he had in his library and the way they influenced him in the process of conceiving and creating his work. Thank you very much for everyone.
Well, thank you so much for that talk. We're now at the point that we have a little bit of time for question and answer. And so I'll invite you to share any questions you have in the chat box. The other option for sharing questions would be to use the raise hand icon, and I would be happy to invite you to unmute if you would prefer to ask your question that way. And we have our first taker. So Adam, if you'd like to unmute.
Thank you so much for this wonderful lecture. I found so convincing your analysis of the young Cano and the young Velázquez competing together in the workshop and creating these two versions of the Immaculate Conception. And what an exciting discovery of this previously unpublished. And I would love if you could tell us a little more about your expertise in attribution. And this also goes, I'm not a scholar of drawings, but I was struck by the difference of the very geometric, very finished architectural drawings of the altars, and then on the other side, the very fluid, very fast drawings of individual figures, or as you suggested, very initial studies or very early studies. And how do you think through the process of attribution of such different styles of work? And in your mind, what characterizes Cano's particular style of drawing to
Yes.
your eyes?
Thank you very much, Adam. It's a very, very interesting question. The first is to separate the two language in his graphic manner. No, I am convinced that Cano as an architect, and it is the reason that there are many books of architecture in his library. In this fact, when an architect drawing is an absolutely different language than to the fresh language in the sketch. No, it is very interesting to compare, but it is different register. But it is saying that in the Italian artists, if you see the Michelangelo drawings in architecture, it's absolutely different language with the language that he's used in the other. No, this very different register. No, and I am absolutely convinced that the idea that Cano is absolutely beloved of Italian artists of the Renaissance. And the presence of this Vignola and all the engravings and the drawing of altarpiece is the manner to Montagnès in the manner to avoid this architectural had, no, in the content. Thank you, Adam. Very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'll just give another moment for questions to come in as people are formulating their thoughts. All right. So Sabina, if you'd like to unmute.
Hi. I wanted to ask, thank you, Benito, for your presentation. I also agree that the two Immaculates are fantastically compared. And also, I like very much the Martinez-Montañez discourse, the same discourse of rivalry with Martinez-Montañez. On that regard, I wanted to ask you, what do we know about Cano's proficiency in wooden sculpture and in carpentry, especially in Seville?
In carpentry, they are absolutely different, because we need to study the language, the sculpture, the content of the creation in different of the carpentry, because he make a drawing, a traza, but the process of creation not is by him. It's only that the idea, the invention. But it is important, your question, for encourage the young scholar that begin to study Montañez and Cano. My hope in the Spanish scholar is Manuel García Luque, because he need to see Cano with the age of Martinez Montañez. It is the key. We cannot separate the study of Cano and his invention in this culture without the lesson of Martinez Montañez. And the reason is in the Valencia Vignola. I think that it is a book that but need to study and to give more surprise.
But could this be demonstrated, this sort of distancing, no? In the allotment and retracing all the history of the retablo construction in Seville, of Martinez Montañez retablos, because that's maybe possibly to demonstrate, you know, that he only does the design and that he had no training whatsoever. But then we have these busts.
I think that Miguel Cano, his father, and all the companies of the workshop are many, but it's very difficult to me to understand that he make the carpenter is other artists, not is by him. It's the same such that in the Madrileñum, it is inventive. And when he go to Madrid, his drawing, his ideas is definitive to come study the Madrileñum painter.
Yeah, but there is whatsoever, however, if we want to think about Cano, I mean, I'd love to think about a Cano as a Spanish Michelangelo. There is an inconsistency in draftsmanship, which is really, really stunning. Mm-hmm. And because it's true that Michelangelo's, but Cami brothers did a very good job on Michelangelo's drawing and draftsmanship. And I think that the unity of Michelangelo's graphic is much more strong, even when it comes to architectural ornament and the way he conceives sculptures. So I'd love to think about Cano as a Michelangelo, Spanish Michelangelo, but it actually really doesn't work. So I was wondering whether he had any pretensions about that. Mm-hmm. Because in the end, he's a dissatisfactory painter, in my opinion.
But he's very, very, very conscient that his capacities, absolutely.
That's why I say that, because the drawings have that level. But when it comes to unity and coherence, there's something weird, which I think Adam was talking about. Yes. Somehow. I mean, his graphics are so And so it really has to do with, I think, la sua formazione, no? La sua formazione grafica. Dove la dobbiamo collocare? In Pacheco or nei talleres? And finally, I mean, those busts.
In Seville,
those busts?
In Seville, absolutely, with Pacheco in his workshop, and related to with connection with Murillo, the young Murillo. It is the reason because we can confund the drawings. There are evident relation, but his apprentice is in Seville, absolutely.
Fascinating topic. Bellissimo.
Well, I hate to have to step in and kind of cut off the conversation, but we are at time. So there are many kind of glowing thank yous in the chat box, and I would like to echo all of that. We so appreciate the talk that you just gave. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.